Let's start the show. You already know who it is. My name is Mike Kyle, aka the Fantasy Vulture. I have over a decade worth of fantasy football experience and have continuously competed for fantasy championships over the course of the past 6 seasons. But enough of me, I'm here for you. On today's episode of the Fantasy Vulture, we continue our all 32 NFL team preview series, taking a look at each team through the lens of fantasy football. Today, we wrap up the NFC South by talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But before we get started with the video, I need 3 things from you. First off, smash that subscribe button, power running back style so you never miss a video. Also hit the like button like an open receiver downfield, Patrick Mahomes style. And then also you can text me 330-302-1554 if you have any sort of fantasy football question, you need advice, whatever the case may be. That is the best place to reach me. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. I'm feeling good. All of a sudden, I hit that record button, and I got a lot of energy. Before I hit that, I was like, yeah, not sure if I'm feeling it, but now we're here. Let's just jump right in. And we're going to start off with the newest addition to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that is Tom Brady. Thomas Brady, formerly of the Patriots, makes his way down south to the retirement capital of the world, Tampa Bay. So Tom Brady, there's so many different narratives here with this Buccaneers team, right? This defense improved a lot last year compared to what it was the year before. They have a lot of great offensive pieces as far as weaponry goes. And now you throw in the best quarterback of all time who has won 6 Super Bowls. And I think the question becomes with Brady specifically this year is, what is he going to bring to this Bruce Arians offense? Because what's really fascinating about Bruce Arians, right? Bruce Arians does have, it's a lot of let's just get downfield and air this ball out. And we've seen some success in this system with older quarterbacks. Specifically, the one that comes to mind is Carson Palmer. Now, granted, Carson Palmer was not the age of Tom Brady, but still you kind of can see the comparisons there back when Arians was in Arizona. So now that I say that out loud, and I was really trying to think of what the outlook for Tom Brady could be going into this, and I was initially going to say that you have 2 very contrasting styles here. Tom Brady doesn't air the ball out as much as he once did. The accuracy's dropped a little bit. So where does that leave us in this offense? But the honest answer is Tom Brady is probably an upgrade from Jameis Winston in real life football. But in fantasy, that might not be the case, because the key for Jameis and the Buccaneers' offensive success was Jameis was going to throw the ball a ton. He was going to make mistakes, but pretty much for every good throw he made, or for every bad throw he made, a great throw was made very, very closely following that mistake. So the upside, I think, for these guys is limited, but when you take away that upside and you replace it with better accuracy, I'm not sure if the drop is going to be too significant. And I think that's the main thing about this Buccaneers offense this season. So Tom Brady last year finished as quarterback 12 overall. And let's just dive into the stats a little bit. 613 pass attempts, just because that team needed him to throw because they had no running game. 373 completions, over 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. And the weekly finishes is really what I want to get into as far as Tom Brady goes. So he had 5 games as a QB1, 8 games as a QB2, and 3 games as a QB3. And that QB2 number is what I really want to talk about, because that's kind of just where he's at in his career. He's not going to give you the boom games, or the consistent boom games that he once would, and that number's scary, because we play, for the most part, we play in single quarterback leagues with either 12 or 10 team league in and of itself. So you're starting 12 quarterbacks at the most, and he's outside of that the majority of his games. So that is very concerning to me. But that's probably just because last year, honestly, if you just want to get real down to brass tacks here, that receiving core in New England was probably the worst of his career. And so when you have a receiving core like that with an aging quarterback, it's probably not going to go over well. and that's kind of why that's why I have him ranked above the consensus right now. So his current ADP is quarterback 15, going in the 10th round, but I have him ranked as quarterback 10, so he just kind of squeaks into that quarterback 1 territory for me, and it's just because these weapons are too good. Like, they are too good for him to fail. Being Tom Brady, I don't care that he's 42, 43, however old he is. These weapons and the pieces in this offense are way too good for him to have a bad fantasy season. It's almost impossible. It's kind of the same way that I feel about Drew Brees as well, where just the supporting cast is so strong, so dynamic, and can make their own plays that it's going to boost these quarterbacks' floors because of that, and they'll be safe throughout pretty much all year. When you look at the adjusted score, I kind of glossed over that, didn't even mention it really. He only, and this goes back to kind of that poor supporting cast, he only averaged just a shade under 17 points per game. He played all 16, just typical Tom Brady things, and his new finish would be quarterback 16. So that does reflect that QB2, the weekly QB2 finishes for Tom Brady there. But I think that's pretty much it. As far as Tom Brady goes, this feels kind of pretty cut and dry. You're going to get a guy who's probably going to have a lot of games as a QB1, some fringe QB2 games, but overall his fantasy finish, I think he should be a quarterback 1 when the season is all said and done. Now let's move on to the interesting aspect of this Buccaneers offense, and that is the running backs. And we're going to start off with Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones' 2019 finish was 27 in standard, 26 in PPR, so he was a wide receiver, or he was a running back 3, excuse me there. His weekly finishes, he has 4 games as a running back 1, 2 games as a running back 2, and 3 games as a running back 3. And his stats, he had 172 carries, 31 receptions, 724 rushing yards, 309 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. Now, you also have to remember that he was splitting time last season in the backfield with Peyton Barber. And this backfield last year was an absolute nightmare because for the majority of the season, you were pretty much just trying to decide which Buccaneers running back to start, and odds are you probably didn't want to start any of them. But once Ronald Jones really got going towards the second half of the season, he was overall pretty good. I'm going to pull up the numbers right here just to confirm such a thing. Let's see. Text that contains Ronald Jones. So it was really that middle part of the season when he really took off. And because in that middle part from week 9 through 9 through 12, he had 3 games as that running back 1, and then week 16 as well. So if you played him in the championship, odds are you probably won, because when you start Ronald Jones and he has a good game, that's only going to help you. But then we really want to look at the adjusted score here, and this is where things get kind of iffy, right? He only averaged 9.5 points per game. He played all 16, and his new finish was running back 33. Now, the question really becomes for this season is, what version of Ronald Jones are we going to get? Because we've seen the games now where he can play well. We've seen some games where he's just kind of meh, and then we've seen the really bad games. And the rookie that they brought in only is going to continue to muddy the waters. Now, there was a chance this offseason, if they didn't draft Keshawn Vaughn, who we're going to talk about in just a moment, that we could be looking at Ronald Jones as a top 15 running back. But now I'm not sure where that actually lies, because this offense is so good. Whoever is getting the work here in this offense is going to be relevant for fantasy purposes. It's really just a question of who it is. And if you want to take the throw on Ronald Jones, I'm not going to. I get it. I get why you would. I'm just not sure if I'm comfortable with it, knowing that there are other guys probably that I know that I could probably get who I'd feel more confident in their workload going forward. Just because when you have a rookie running back coming in, even though Bruce Arians doesn't necessarily like using rookies all too often during their first seasons, you just never know how that rookie could just take over that job and eliminate the veteran running back. Even though Ronald Jones, this is like year 3 for him. But his ADP makes things a little bit easier because he is going so late, and you are spending a 7th or 8th round pick on him. His ADP is 7-12, so that's right around that 7-8 turn. Running back 33, I have him as running back 31. And I actually have him significantly higher than Keshawn Vaughn, and it's not because of Vaughn. Wait, it's not because of Jones. It's because of Vaughn. I'm not entirely sold on him, and we're going to talk about him in just a moment. So overall, if you want to take the dart throw on Ronald Jones, like this, there's somebody in this backfield who's going to have value. If you believe it's Ronald Jones, then take your shot. I'm not willing to risk a draft pick, I don't think, on him in this way. But he's a player that I'm willing to be wrong about, all things considered. I think that's the best way that I can summarize what he could be. Now let's go into the rookie, and we're going to introduce something brand new. This is our first rookie that we are going to talk about. This entire division, for the most part, did not draft a fantasy-relevant rookie. The Panthers and the Falcons were the only two teams that did not draft an offensive skill player, and the Saints drafted a tight end who really isn't valuable at all right now, so there was no sense in talking about him whatsoever. But now, brand new thing, rookie profiles. So now what we got the rookies, it's kind of same format. Rookie player heads on the left side, followed by their player comparison that I give them. A nice little thanks for watching shout out at the top, followed by their 2019 stats, their measurables, their height, weight, and 40 time, what draft capital they were drafted with, their ADP, and my current ranking of them. So let's talk about Keshawn Vaughn. In my dynasty league, I traded up. I traded a few second round pick. I traded a second round pick, I traded a third round pick, and I traded a fourth round pick to get into the back half of the first, because I traded my first round pick before this season started, going into last year. So I was down a first round pick, and I wanted to get back into the first to find a way. So I made that trade. And I kind of made that trade with the intention of considering taking Keshawn Vaughn there, because my dynasty team does need a running back. However, once I continued to do the dive on Keshawn Vaughn, I'm not entirely sold. To me, he did nothing that really stood out. He did carve up LSU, and LSU obviously won the Natty, and their defense was incredible last season. So if you want to take that as like a major win for him, then go right on ahead. I can't dispute that whatsoever. But he didn't do anything that popped off the page. He just kind of looked like a guy, and there was nothing that I could see that was just like, oh, this dude is going to be a star running back in the NFL. So the player comparison that I have for him for that way is Tevin Coleman. Like, Tevin Coleman does nothing interesting. He's just a standard running back, and unfortunately, that's just kind of how this thing plays out. And what makes this really complicated for me is because Bruce Arians' running backs are always so productive. And so you have to ask yourself, is the opportunity worth more than the talent? And in fantasy football, the odds are yes, most likely. But when you are in a position to where you don't know if this guy's even going to get the volume that some people are projecting because Ronald Jones is there, I think I'm staying away from Keshawn Vaughn for right now. I understand that that he may take over the job of Ronald Jones later on in the season and beyond, which is kind of giving me that, oh no, am I making the right decision as far as dynasty goes? But I'm not sure how this plays out. I guess we should also talk about, what he actually did, even though this analysis that I'm giving is super important as well. So he's 5'10", weighs 205, and he has a speed of 4.5, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like 4.5 speed, like obviously for a athlete, like that's good, but when you look around at like some other times, like meh, like a 4.5 is nothing fancy whatsoever. As far as his 2019 stats go, he had just a shade under 200 carries, 28 receptions, over 1,000 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, and 270 receiving yards. And that's kind of what people are focusing in on when we're talking about when we're talking about Keshawn Vaughn, is the receptions. But 28 receptions is nothing. As we just saw with Ronald Jones, I'm going to pull this back up. Ronald Jones had 31 catches last season, and Ronald Jones was kind of splitting that backfield work with Peyton Barber. So Ronald Jones, like, he can catch the ball. There is this narrative that he can't. He clearly can, and he was probably a better pass catcher than Keshawn Vaughn was in college. So I don't understand where this love for Keshawn Vaughn has come from. I've tried to sell myself on it multiple times, and I don't like being negative about a player. But Keshawn Vaughn is probably a guy that I'm willing to be wrong about this season because on top of the fact that one, he's splitting time already in the backfield, two, he might not even see the field because of the way that Bruce Arians operates, and number three, I just don't see it from a talent perspective. He just looks like a standard running back to me, and nothing really explodes off the page, even though he was drafted in the third round of the NFL draft. So his ADP is currently running back 43, going at the 9-10 turn, and I actually have him at running back 36. Did I flip that up? I feel like I messed that up. Because running back 36, that does. Let's see. One moment while this loads. Yeah, I do. I have Keshawn Vaughn at running back 36. And that's just kind of because when I look at the other guys behind him, I'm not sure what the outcomes could be. So I have Marlon Mack behind him, and once again, that's just one of those things where I think ultimately I don't know what to do with Marlon Mack because of the fact that Jonathan Taylor is there now. I have Darius Geis behind Keshawn Vaughn, and that's just because I'm completely out on Geis. Philip Lindsay, you can make the argument there. Kerryon Johnson, you can make the argument there. And then J.K. Dobbins. And I think that Dobbins is going to be kind of put in the same situation as Vaughn. So all those guys are basically in the backup running back zone and who are probably going to see some pass catching work, and that's kind of who they are in the NFL at this current moment in time. And that's just how I see Keshawn Vaughn. I have Keshawn Vaughn higher than them on the off chance that he does take over Ronald Jones' position in this offense. But let's go on to the wide receiving core. I feel like I talked about the running backs long enough here. And this is going to be really simple. We can fly through these two players back to back because there's not a whole lot to be said. Chris Godwin asserted himself as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL last season. I was on the Chris Godwin hype train last year. I had him in 2 of my 3 leagues, and I tried to trade for him in the third before the season started. And Chris Godwin was unbelievable, but there were times where he disappeared for you. See 3 games as a wide receiver 3, and that's not all too hot. And just naturally, if you add that up, there were a few games where he actually finished worse than a wide receiver 3. So he did have the tendency to disappear, and maybe that was more so a Jameis thing than a Godwin thing because Jameis obviously has his fair share of bad games. But when Chris Godwin was on, this dude was unstoppable. This dude put your team on his back, and he carried you to victories with 5 games finishing as a wide receiver 1. In both formats, he finished as the wide receiver 2 overall, 121 targets, 86 catches, 1,333 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. When you run the math and you run the stats for the adjusted score, I actually made a whole video talking about that if you missed it and how I come up with those numbers. He still finished as the wide receiver 2. So why is he not being drafted in this upper echelon now of wide receivers? Why is he not being in that consideration, in the conversation between Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill? And I think the question goes back to Tom Brady. Because I think if Jameis Winston's the quarterback, I think you absolutely have him in the top 3 at least. Who you would kick out, I'm not sure. That's a conversation for a different day. But the issue with Godwin, right, is there were so many times where the Bucs were either down and they had to rally and they're just going to let Jameis air it out and just have Godwin make plays. And now, once again, going back to this offensive shift, I don't know if those opportunities are going to still be there, but I think Godwin can absolutely still probably put up similar numbers with Tom Brady, so I'm not too concerned. Honestly, going at wide receiver 6 in the middle of the second feels about right for me. I don't know. Actually, you guys saw in the mock draft, I took Godwin in the back of the second because I had the second pick, and he fell to me all the way back at the 2-3 turn. And that, to me, to have that kind of player as my wide receiver 1 after solidifying Ezekiel Elliott as my starting running back, like that is a massive combination. That's an incredible 1-2 punch at running back and wide receiver to start the draft. I, like the consensus, have Godwin as my wide receiver 6. And I think, once again, you're just going to get another great year from a young wide receiver who I don't think he's going to take another step forward this year because that would just be unbelievable. But I do think he's going to pick up pretty much right where he left off last season. Now let's talk about the guy who I think is actually going to suffer the most, and that is Mike Evans. So Mike Evans' 2019 finish was wide receiver 8 in standard, 12 in PPR, so he was a wide receiver 1 in both formats. He had 5 games as a wide receiver 1 and 3 games as a wide receiver 3. He did not finish as a wide receiver 2 whatsoever. And that was kind of the story with Mike Evans all last season. There were games where he played really, if he didn't play great, he played very poorly for you. So he hurt you more often than not. And then he also missed a few games due to injury as well. So in 2019, he kind of almost had similar targets compared to Chris Godwin, had less catchable passes because Evans is more so a deep threat than Chris Godwin, because Chris Godwin can kind of play in all different spots of the field. He still racked up 1,100 yards. He actually had more yards. No, he didn't. My bad. He had 200 less yards than Godwin, but 1 less touchdown. And the points per game overall, this is where things get wild. When you consider Mike Evans' points per game, he actually finished as the wide receiver 3, I think. I feel like that's wrong. I feel like I needed to make that correction. No, that is correct. That can't be right. Let's see. I'll be damned. That is correct. Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Yeah, so when you take Mike Evans' numbers and you take the averages and you multiply them out by 16 for a 16-game pace compared to the rest of the NFL and the rest of the wide receivers, he does finish as wide receiver 3. And that speaks more so to his ceiling per week. When you look at those wide receiver 1 finishes, his points, like he's had massive games before where he's putting up 30 or 40 points, and that's obviously going to skew the average points per game just a little bit. But still, regardless, 15 points per game is nothing to scoff at. That's hard to do. That's an incredible feat. And it's really just a matter of how you get there, right? Would you rather have 15 points per game when you have 3 games of 30 points and 2 games of 10? So that's kind of the question that you have to ask yourself is consistency more valuable than a ceiling? And I don't have the answer for that. That's more so a team roster construction type thing. But the reason why I think Evans takes a step back is just because Brady's not going to throw the ball deep as much as he used to, as much as he once did. That's just a natural thing with age. We kind of saw it last year where he would throw some balls and woo-wee, they did not look pretty coming off the arm. And so because of that, Evans is probably going to regress ultimately just because of that play style shift. Once again, Jameis would just chuck it, whereas Brady's going to be a little bit more conservative. And by a little bit more, I mean way more conservative with the throws that he's going to make, which is why his ADP is kind of confusing to me. It's wide receiver 7 going in the back of the second round, which I guess fine, but I actually have him at wide receiver 9, and I actually made that adjustment before I started recording. I moved Juju Smith-Schuster ahead of him, and that's just kind of because when you have Mike Evans competing for targets consistently with Chris Godwin, and now you also have him going deep where Brady doesn't throw deep, and then you're looking at Juju Smith-Schuster, who is the number 1 option on his team, has Big Ben, who's willing to throw him the ball a ton. That just made more sense to me to move Juju 1 spot ahead. I do want to talk about the wide receivers that I have around Godwin, or around Evans, though, because I think the conversation there could get interesting. So I have Evans at 9, and the guys I have behind Evans are Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, Amari Cooper, A.J. Brown, Adam Thielen, Calvin Ridley. There's the world where you move Evans down to probably 12, and you move A-Rob, Odell, and Amari ahead of him. But I do just think with the upside of Tom Brady just being a better overall quarterback than Jameis Winston, that Evans could still be perfectly fine finishing as a top 10 wide receiver, which is why I have him still ranked just inside that top 10 for now. That could change, but ultimately I think that's kind of how I see things playing out for Mike Evans. Just be wary about the potential regression for Mike Evans, because that quarterback shift in play style is going to matter a lot for his fantasy value specifically. And lastly, we can't talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers without bringing up their newest tight end, Rob Gronkowski. So let's get this out of the way. O.J. Howard's dead. O.J. Howard is dead. Cameron Brate's dead. I don't care about either of those guys. They are fantasy irrelevant now and forever unless O.J. Howard gets traded to a different team. So with Rob Gronkowski, we have to look at things a little bit differently, and I did the best that I could, and I actually forgot to change the weekly finishes from 2019 to 2018, so that's an error on my end. I knew I was forgetting to do something, but it's fine. So his 2018 finish in standard and PPR was both tight end 11. And now when we look at the adjusted score, what I did was I took his 2018 score, and then I applied it to the tight ends of 2019. So that new finish of tight end 12 reflects this year or this past season's fantasy finishes. So he had 8.3 points per game. He played in 13 games, and that new finish put him still inside the tight end 1 at TE12. He had 5 games as the tight end 1, 4 games as the tight end 2, and 3 games as the tight end 3. So he was still really good for your fantasy team when we last saw Rob Gronkowski play. And that kind of has me really excited. Granted, a tight end 2 is not over the moon awesome because tight end position is a position where you only start 1 per week. But still, he'll be fine even if he gives you those kind of numbers. You'd like to see the tight end 2 numbers go down in favor of the tight end 1 numbers, but we all can't get what we want. He had 72 targets, 47 receptions, 682 yards, and 3 touchdowns. In an offense like this, all those numbers could and should probably go up, especially with the fact that Brady is entering a new team where he doesn't have chemistry with the wide receiving core or the running backs. And so if he needs to have that security blanket, what better security blanket than the guy he's played with for the last, who knows, decade essentially. That's just a wonderful gift. Like that is a gift wrap present for Rob Gronkowski's fantasy value right there. So Gronk's ADP is tight end 14 in the 10th round. I would love to take the dart throw on Gronk this season at that draft price because I do have him as a tight end 1 coming in at tight end 12 for me overall on the year. Once again, I don't know what he's going to look like because we haven't seen him play in a year. But to me, I'm still kind of clutching onto the fact that it is Rob Gronkowski, and he does have that connection with Brady. So if there is some sort of situation just in a game whatsoever, and Brady, quote, panics, just boom. When in doubt, throw it to your man, right? Throw it to your man, throw it to your brother, throw it to your best friend, and let him do what he does. The one issue, though, that I will say as far as Gronk goes is the Arians system does not like to use tight ends all too much. If they did, we would have loved to see O.J. Howard be this special player that he was projected to be, but unfortunately that never materialized. So that is the one hesitancy with Rob Gronkowski this year, and that's just be kind of cautious of the fact that there is a chance that the production doesn't fully come to fruition because of the fact that this offense does not usually rely on the tight end position. But still, if you're going to play that late round tight end game, and I know there are a few that I love late in drafts. I talked about did I talk about Jonnu Smith? I did. I talked about Jonnu Smith in the mock draft that I did. Rob Gronkowski is an excellent candidate for this because you are going to get him in that 10th round very late in drafts when your running back core, wide receiving core, and probably quarterback are solidified. So it just makes a lot of sense. If you want to grab a tight end like Gronk at the 10th round, absolutely do it. I will not fault you whatsoever. But I think that's going to do it for this episode of All 32, our NFL preview series, where we take a look at each and every NFL team through the lens of fantasy football. I think that's going to be it. Be sure to shoot me a text this way. I'm going to get this wrong so many times. Be sure to shoot me a text 330-302-1554 for any and all of your fantasy football needs or concerns or worries. If you just have a question, maybe you're on the clock in the middle of your draft and you're like, oh my god, I don't know who to pick. Just shoot me a text, 2 names. I'll give you the best one. And then also you can follow me on all social media at FFVulture. Check out the website. We finally launched it just about an hour ago. It was one of those things where it took a little bit more time than I expected it to in order for it to come together. Excuse me, I cannot talk today, but it's fine. But it looks really nice. I love the way that it turned out, and it's going to be really fun to see all the pages populate with content as we get this thing going. The website's actually really dope. It's set up each page, each post is where the YouTube video is on top. So if you want to watch the YouTube video, you can. We then have links to the Apple and the Spotify podcast, respectively. And at the bottom, I have a whole transcript, essentially, of my thoughts from the video. So if you're into reading content, we have that for you there as well. But that's pretty much it. That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and also that like button down below, because that does help the channel out so much. And also leave a comment about your thoughts around the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense during the 2020 season. And with that, I will catch you next time. And remember, people come and go, but fantasy championships are forever. Later.